Good morning, everybody. Oh my gosh, today is going to be an exciting day. We are going to get to discuss dual agents and how it works. And I have with me my very good friend, Eric, who is a real estate attorney here in San Diego. Thanks for joining me, Eric, once again.
Thanks for having me, Scott, once again.
We're going to do this regularly. No, this is going to be a really, really, really good topic because I see so many people going to the listing agent and asking the listing agent, hey, can you represent us in this transaction? We don't have a buyer's agent and we're hoping to get a better deal from it. And we're hoping to, get the benefit of getting kind of the inside track with the listing agent as well as the seller. But I think what most buyers aren't aware of is that there is a massive conflict of interest, right? Because the real estate agent that is representing the seller can't honestly represent you and protect you. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, that the sheer nature of you're going to be representing, let's say, the sellers, you got to act in this interest of the sellers. But if you're also representing the buyer, you got to represent the interest of the buyer, and those interests, oftentimes in a real estate transaction, do conflict.
Yeah, and the thing is so then buyers are basically set to almost represent themselves. And I found this really cute cartoon that I want to share with everyone because it's so classic. And I'm not saying that we're doctors and anything, but if you take a look at this comic, basically what it basically says is that this person is going to do self-surgery because they figured it might it's time that they can save some money and things like that. And whenever somebody represents themselves, this is what I think of, right? Or worse yet, I mean, the other example that I think of is like hiring a lawyer who is suing somebody, that has wronged you, but then having that lawyer also represent the guy who wronged you, right? I mean, it just, I don't know. It shouldn't be illegal. It should be illegal, but for whatever reason, it is, and I am honestly not sure why.
Yeah, it's well, in the example of the attorney representing both sides in a lawsuit, that just never happens. It's but you're right. In the real estate side, though, I do see a lot of agents do represent both the sellers and the buyers. It's not illegal in California to do so.
Yeah,
Um, it puts the agent that's represented in a very risky position, though, because any buyer or seller after closing the transaction may come back and say, hey, agent, I don't think you represented my interest in this, and we have this concept in that real estate agents are fiduciaries. There's a fiduciary duty to your client to act in their interest, and you could be held in a lawsuit
yeah.
if a client claims that you're not acting in their interest.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that because there are states that prohibit dual agent representation, where the agent represents both the buyer and the seller. And those states are Alaska, Colorado, Florida, Kansas, Maryland, Oklahoma, Texas, and Vermont. So those are the states that dual agents aren't allowed. So for our audience, I want to make sure that you guys are clear about something. You hear the word dual agency thrown around a lot, right? Dual agency and dual agent are slightly different things, right? Dual agency is the agency or the brokerage that is representing both the seller or the buyer. And the agency, for example, like Compass or EXP or these other real, they could have thousands and thousands of brokers or agents under their umbrella. And so theoretically speaking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, which is if two agents under the same brokerage represent the same transaction, it's still technically considered a dual agency because the agency or the brokerage is representing both parties. However, a dual agent situation or dual representation situation is when one agent represents both parties. And that's the problem I have, which is the dual agent situation, because I can see that dual agencies could happen where two agents under the same umbrella of the brokerage could represent each other and never actually know each other. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That the um, what you describe as a dual agencies, you have to look at who the broker is, right? There's brokers and salespersons, and quickly into licensing. You can be licensed as a broker, and you can have your own independent company where you have sales licensed people that act on behalf of the broker. So you can have a situation where you have multiple, the same brokerage may represent the buyer, but by an actual separate agent, and same agent under the same broker represent the sellers, and
Yeah.
completely separate. Right. So that does happen. And then the other situation is where he's just one person represents both the buyer and seller, which is what you had said you had concerns about.
Yeah. And I think that's where the massive conflict of interest comes in, because when you represent a client, real estate agents, like attorneys, have a fiduciary responsibility to that client. And a fiduciary responsibility, for those who aren't aware of what it is, it's one of the highest levels of responsibility there is to protect the other party's interest. And the thing is I think lawyers actually have a higher level of have a higher level of responsibility. The name of that responsibility escapes me, but fiduciary is very, very high. And so what happens is, when an agent dual represents a buyer and a seller in the same transaction, it is actually against the law, if I'm not mistaken, that to do fiduciary responsibility, because you can't do a fiduciary responsibility for, like, let's say, a seller, and then what ends up happening is you screw the buyer in the process, right? Because they're on opposite sides of the negotiation. And so a lot of agents, what they do is, in order to walk that fine gray, really, really gray line, is they kind of full disclosure to everybody, full disclosure to the seller and full disclosure to the buyer. And that may sound amazing. Oh, okay, yeah, full disclosure. I get all that information. Yeah, absolutely. That doesn't harm me. But here's a situation I'm going to ask you, right? And viewers to think about. Imagine if, let's say, a seller tells the listing agent, hey, you know what? I'm really feeling the pressure. I need this thing to close, and I'm willing to give these buyers, $15,000 credit in order to make this deal close, right? Let's say in a request for repair situation, or helping the buyers buy down interest rates, as it's more common now that interest rates have gone up. If the agent is representing both the seller and the buyer, is the agent responsible for telling the buyer, if, let's say, the agent knows that the buyer is happy to proceed forward and doesn't have a problem with buying this house without the $15,000 credit, right?
Yeah, it's a very difficult situation to navigate. Uh,
Because theoretically, you're supposed to tell the buyer, but
Theoretically, yes.
you're
Right.
kind of screwed. You kind of screw your seller over, or vice versa.
Right. So it's why we oftentimes don't recommend that. There are situations where both buyers and sellers' interests do align, right? And you can't, and that interest does, is equally favorable to both sides, and that's fine. But those opportunities are, uh, you know, they're not rare, but they're very difficult to navigate, because oftentimes in real estate transactions, you're going to have a conflict. You're going to have both sides that's going to disagree on either requests for repairs or certain terms of the purchase.
Yeah.
So as an agent, you put yourself in that situation, you're going to have to know how to navigate that situation.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, the thing is also, with the scenario that I just explained, like, if, let's say, an agent is representing two agents are representing both the buyer and the seller separately. If, let's say, I, as a listing agent, knows that my seller is, like, really, really motivated to give $15,000 to get this thing to close, I represent only my sellers, right? So as an agent, when I'm negotiating for on behalf of my sellers, I don't disclose that to the other agent. Like, are you kidding me? That's free money that I'm giving them, right? So what I do is I make the other side force my hand to give that money, right? And then the buyer's agent is like, hey, look, I got to protect my buyer. So I'm going to push as hard as I can within reason so that this deal doesn't fall apart because my buyer wants it. There is so much what I want to classify as secret information between the buyer and the seller that the agents are handling as a mediator in the middle. And if you have this extra information, that agent is not doing you any favor. So like I'm cautioning buyers because I see it all the time, and especially on my listings, right? Eric, where they call me and they're like, hey, Scott, we don't have an agent. We want to use you. Can you represent us in this transaction? Right? And my answer to them is, well, I'd love to sell you this house, but you're going to have to go find a buyer agent to represent you because I am not able to do that because the situation is that I am going to actually have to break my fiduciary responsibility to my seller.
Correct. Good agents will do exactly what you just described, because they know that it's a very risky position, and also it helps the agent be a better agent because now you just focus on the selling side, right? As you mentioned, there are certain cards that you play, and I'll go to the poker analogy again. Is that in negotiations with real estate transactions, you can either play poker with your hands not revealed, or in a dual agency situation, technically, you got to play poker with both sides' hands all revealed. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great
Um,
example. Great example.
right. So I don't know. Maybe in a situation where you're trying to play poker where their hand, they know your hand, potentially the outcome is, each side is satisfied with, that. So, or you can play poker with no hands revealed, and potentially you got the better end of the deal, right? You just never know because you don't know what the other side is. The other side could have, been willing to do 20K above listing, right? But you didn't know that, right? So, you know, it's a different situation, and I think the poker analogy really does help paint a picture for the viewers exactly what we're describing.
So let me ask you this. So when a buyer comes to you, let's say as an attorney, right, and says, hey, I want to do a dual representation, like, what would be your advice to them? What would you tell them? I mean, keep in mind, guys, this video is only for education purposes only. Eric is not your attorney. But with that said, what would you tell them?
Well, I said that's fine. There's nothing illegal about it. An agent can represent both sides in the transaction. However, you have to understand that in those type of situations, your agent, one, technically they're getting paid by the sellers, right? They sign a listing agreement. The commission comes from the seller side. We can do a little side section on the NAR settlement, how that affects that situation.
Yeah,
But let's
we're
for
going to
this,
talk about that
yeah,
actually.
for this purposes, yes, technically. So they have a more incentive to have an interest on the seller's interest, because they want this deal to close and sell, and potentially because they're being paid by the sellers, they want the price to be higher because their commission is calculated by the price of the deal.
But Eric, I can get a rebate, if I use the listing agent.
Well, one, if any listing agent is doing a kickback and commission, you need to run away. Okay, that's a huge red flag. That's not allowed. That's illegal at that point. Okay, commissions can only be paid to licensed real estate agents. Okay, so
But
um,
but the listing agent isn't able to give me a kickback as a buyer for that transaction. I thought it was legal.
well, no, it's not. No. It happens. Okay, technically, you're not supposed to do it. If you do it, then I can guarantee you your agent is not going to be acting in your interest on this transaction, and it's going to be telling you things that potentially is going to put you at risk of buying something that you're going to regret later.
And this is where we're going to share some amazing stories later in this podcast or in the show about lawsuits that Eric has been a part of as a litigating attorney for the other side, and both the listing agent and the buyer's agent, it was ugly for them. So the thing is this is I want to kind of go over the pros and cons, right, of dual agent situation, dual representation. And honestly, when I was sitting down doing the research for this and I was trying to figure out all the pros and cons, what I realized was that the pros are really only to the listing agent. There really isn't a lot of pros that I came up with for either party, the seller or the buyer. In the listing agreement, what you'll see is that the listing agent, has a, let me pull this up real quick. I'm going to share with you guys the slide, and it's basically a buyer broker agreement. Okay. And where let me see it. Where is it? Add to state. Okay. Oh, I can't do that because what it does is it's too small. See, I'm learning. I'm going to share my screen instead. So give me 1 second, guys. Okay, so I'm going to share with you guys this contract. Okay, and basically what it is the buyer's agreement that the agents sign with the buyer's agent. Okay, so can you guys see this?
I can see it. You might want to zoom in on that.
Zoom in. Okay, got it.
It's just your plus minus. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so here's the situation. The plus minus might be too small now. Okay, so down here, I'm just going to scroll down. This is the standard CAR form for real estate agents to have their buyer sign. And down here, there is a section that discusses what the commission is. And this is the new CAR form that is approved by the National Association of Realtor since the lawsuit and since the settlement. This is the new buyer's agent commission. And in the state of California, every state is slightly different, but in the state of California, you can have an exclusive relationship with the buyer's agent, but it is limited to 3 months. It cannot exceed 3 months. And so agents that try to make like a 6 months, 4 months, a year listing buyer's agent agreement, using this contract, it's invalid. It's not allowed. Okay. The other thing is we're going to go down to is right here. Amount of compensation. So this is where the buyer and the buyer's agent agree on a commission that the buyer will pay their agent as part of the representation. If the seller offers a commission, obviously that will go towards this amount. However, if let's say the seller decides he doesn't want to do it and he runs into a situation where there is a buyer who is unrepresented by the seller, the listing agent actually can in fact negotiate a what do you call it? A percentage where they are compensated for representing the seller and the buyer, but not representing the buyer per se as their own client, right? Because it creates more work for that agent. So there's more paperwork, there's more things like that because the buyer may not know what they're doing. And so there's a higher compensation for that. And then obviously the third level is, hey, we can represent both the buyer and the seller, and then that compensation is typically the full commission. And so because of this, and because of this reason, buyers think, oh, well, if I go to the agent, I'm going to get a better price, right? I can negotiate 1% of my of the agent's commission towards my closing costs to help me buy this or pay down that. And typically, let's say 1% of the purchase price is on a commission. Let's say that's $25,000, right? You're probably going to get $10,000, maybe $7,000 out of that, if let's say the purchase price is like $1 million. So the thing is this, is that $10,000 typically more than what you would save if you or would cost you more than what you would lose if you were representing yourself versus having another agent represent you? Does that make sense, Eric?
Yeah, it's a math calculation.
It's a math calculation, correct. So the idea is, hey, look, how much can a buyer's agent save you in the negotiation process? Well, there's a lot of room, right? There's request for repair. I mean, I've saved clients $30,000 in rebates or in seller credits back to the buyer because of request for repair, because of negotiation, because of interest rate buy down, right? And as a buyer's agent, it behooves me to do that to protect my buyer. As a listing agent, it doesn't necessarily behoove me. So I'm really trying to understand the psychology of why buyers do this. And if you are a buyer that does this, comment down below. Tell me the reason. Like, why do you feel that it is necessary for you guys to have a listing agent represent you?
Well, here's some of the people that, that contact me. And usually when the people contact me, there's an issue. Okay.
They don't
And,
contact you just for to say hello.
I wish, right? People don't pay my fees just to say hello, right? They contact me because they ran into some real estate problem. And oftentimes that I see and I ask, okay, so why did you have this person represent both, you and the sellers, right? And because they said that it's a very competitive real estate market, and that's the only way that I can get my offer accepted in this transaction. And then they regret it because they realize the seller agents, or technically representing both sides, didn't advise them of certain risks involved in this, right?
Yeah.
So I've seen this type of situation more common in the past 4 years since the pandemic, just because we are in a very competitive real estate market in certain markets.
No, not just most. I think almost everywhere in the United States, supply is not keeping up with demand. I mean, you hear that from all agents and all brokers throughout the country.
Right. So when an agent is double ending their commission, right, they have much more of an incentive to be like, hey, take a closer look at this offer with all the 30 offers that they have on the table. Okay. This one is good for you because, A, B, and C. And the secret D is I get double the commission, right? Or I'm not splitting it with the buyer's agent that potentially is on the other offers,
Yeah.
right?
Well, legally, they're required to disclose to both
Yeah,
parties.
no. It's all the offers are on the table. I'm not hiding anything, but I'm just.
I hear a common reason for why you should Mr. Seller, you should take this offer represented by me because it's our team. We do things more efficiently. It'll make for a smoother transaction. I mean, like these are
That's
the reasons.
correct. Theoretically, there could be, because you have one agent handling all the paperwork, there's not much of a back and forth, right? They can probably streamline, say, look, this is what's going to take to get the job done. This is the price, and none of this buyers counter offers and seller, back and forth. But then, can you really trust this person that is double ending the deal, that they're actually telling you a number that is going to be, acceptable, right? Or are they just throwing a number that's high enough so that they can, pad their commission?
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. I'm sure there are a lot of very fabulous agents out there that, doesn't consider, money in how they operate, but I don't know. Right.
I don't dual represent. I have actually, that's not true. I've dual represented twice in my entire career, right? I've had a broker's license since 2008, and I've only dual represented twice. And that was only because the buyer and the seller knew each other, and they basically came to me and said, hey, Scott, just do the paperwork. In that situation, all right, I'll do a represent because the buyer and seller know each other. They've already come to a pre-arranged agreement between the party. They just need somebody to basically help them with the paperwork. Fine, I will do it, and I'll do it at a reduced price.
There are certain situations where if you're a savvy real estate investor, right, and you know what you're doing, there shouldn't be any reason why you couldn't, just have one agent represent both sides, right? As long as, one side is a very sophisticated real estate person.
Okay, so I'm going to do a survey. How many of our audience members watching think they are a savvy investor? I'll bet you everyone thinks they're savvy. Hey, Eric, do you think you're a savvy investor?
I mean, I buy real estate. I know. So I have been in a situation where there was, I personally was the buyer, right? And I had this agent was representing the sellers. And I mean, technically the agent was representing both sides, but because I was very familiar with, how to buy real estate, I knew exactly what I wanted. So essentially I was just unrepresented. I was just doing
correct. You were unrepresented. And also the reality is you're a real estate attorney in the state of California. Right. You have a real estate license. You're a different situation. I was just giving you a hard time. So here's the thing is I think most buyers will argue that they can potentially get a better deal. They can get the property. And I think these are all missed. These are all missed, especially with the new NAR settlement. And you can kind of clarify this for us. The new NAR settlement basically makes the buyers sign an agreement that says you are responsible for paying your buyer's agent.
Yes. Yeah.
Period, right? There is no more seller situation. Now sellers can opt to offer a buyer's agent commission, but it's not required. It was never required, but the thing was that it is now documented differently.
Yeah, correct. It basically just added another term or complexity to the negotiations when you're submitting your offer. Right now, you have to include: is your offer that the sellers are paying my buyer's agent's commission, or is the offer not including that, and that I, as a buyer, will cover my agent's commission, right? Yeah. So it's just another item that has been added to the long list of things that need to be discussed in a real estate transaction. I have my own personal feelings on this NAR settlement when it's done, but it's just more complexities in an already pretty complex situations. The number of times I get callers trying to ask me, what does this buyer agent agreement mean? I just say, look, you're going to be paying the commission for your agent, regardless if it's coming from the sellers or from your own pocketbook. Okay. Yeah. So, right. More times than not, though, I've seen the offers that's been that been accepted. The sellers do agree to just cover the buyer's agent. So
true. Yeah. True.
That the end result of it has been essentially the same as what it's been before. It's just now you just have to discuss that, make that awkward discussion with your client.
And beforehand. And here's the other thing for those of you who are thinking of buying a home, and when you are at the table with your buyer's agent and you're negotiating that buyer agreement, right? If you negotiate, let's say you want your buyer to help you with the closing costs or whatever, right? That part of it is completely taken out because the buyer's agent now has no control over what the seller pays, right? They never did. And so what happens is in the past, it was disclosed. The seller will pay 2.5%. The seller will pay 2%. Currently, when you're writing an offer, that information is not disclosed. And so during the negotiation, the seller could come back and say, oh, I'm only offering 1%, right? And if your agent agreed with you that says, oh, I'm going to give you 1% of my commission, they're theoretically working for free. So what's happening is, and this is what I've seen, and I want to clarify this for our audience. And I know this is, you're probably starting to get glazed over. Your eyes are like, oh God, Scott, what the hell are you talking about? But this is really important. And the reason why is when you're negotiating with your buyer's agent, let's say you negotiate for 1.5%, 2%, 3%, whatever it is, right? Whatever is in that contract is what your agent will be paid, period. So if, let's say, you think you're savvy buyer, oh, I'm a really good negotiator, Scott, and you negotiate with your buyer's agent and they agree to pay you 1.5, let's say, right? Later on, you find out that, or they find out that the seller was willing to pay 2. Well, guess what, guys? They can't give you at 0.5%. It's not legal anymore. They can only collect what they put in their buyer's agreement. 1.5% in the case of this story, right? And so what ends up happening is what you thought you would potentially get credit for isn't going to happen. So how do you get that credit, right, as a buyer now? The way you get it is you tell your agent, hey, I need that credit to come as a seller concession to me. It's not my agent's commission crediting me anymore, because you've agreed to whatever it is that your agent is going to make with the buyer's broker agreement. Does that make sense to everybody? It's really important. It has to come to you as a concession from the seller. Now, if you agreed to pay your buyer's agent 3% and the seller offered 2, right? Theoretically, you're responsible for that 1%. Now, is it possible that the buyer's agent or their broker can waive that 1%? Maybe. But again, you've agreed to it in advance, which means theoretically, because you've signed that contract, you are responsible for it. Eric, would you not agree with what I just said?
Correct. Yeah. So it basically, again, to the poker analogy, is it used to be that you look on the MLS, you know how much commission you're receiving, right? That's a card that has been revealed, all right? And now the law has said we can't reveal that card anymore, all right? But you as a buyer, you can negotiate whatever commission you want with your agent. Seller can negotiate whatever they want with their agent. You know, nothing is known as about whether the seller is willing to offer, you know, to cover the buyers, and you go in again negotiating blind, and hopefully whatever the end result is something that is to your benefit, whether it's the seller covering all of your buyer's agent's commission, or if not, then you're going to be coming out of pocket for that difference, right?
Yeah. Yep. And I've actually been put in the situation where the buyer had agreed in advance to pay 2.5% on this one particular escrow. And what ended up happening was the seller only offered 2. So my buyer was responsible for coming up with the half. But fortunately, because they hired me and they didn't hire the listing agent, because I was on their side, not the seller's side, I forced the seller to give them a concession. I forced the seller to give an additional, I think it was $4,000, which more than covered the 0.5% that they agreed to pay me. And it actually put in a little bit extra money in their pocket. So for the buyer, it ended up working out well. Needless to say, the seller wasn't too happy with the seller's agent, but they just wanted to sell the house. And see, this is the conflict that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. This is the conflict that I think buyers think that they have a better situation when in fact that's not the case. So
Yeah, that's again, it's just, I don't know. I don't like it whenever I see you know, dual agent situations. I'm just like, the agent is putting themselves at risk. The sellers is, you know, potentially putting themselves at risk and not getting adequate, you know, representation in terms of getting the better end of the deal. And then the buyer again is also putting that at risk. So it just increases the risk of an overall already fairly expensive transaction, right? Real estate in California, you know, any transaction is upwards of $1 million. You're borrowing 80% of it. There's no need to increase that kind of risk.
yeah, yeah. And we're gonna go through some of these lawsuits that you're gonna share with us. But before I do that, I want to play this video. She is one of the top agents in Georgia, and she does a lot of TikTok live streams and things like that, and she's very well known. For our audience, they probably might even know who she is. So let me play this.
Where you represent the seller and you represent the buyer. I'm just telling you right now, there's no way for one agent to get the seller the most money and the buyer the best deal. And there's never a problem till there's a problem. But let me assure you, if somewhere down the road the seller thinks that he left money on the table, or the buyer feels like that they were bamboozled into paying too much, I promise you there will be a problem for you as a real estate agent. Do not kid yourself. When I am the only agent in the transaction, we make it very clear that I represent the sole interest of the seller. And we make you acknowledge that as the buyer. Because in my head, there's no way to get the seller the most money and the buyer the best deal.
She represents the interest of the seller. She fully discloses that. Buyer probably signs a document saying this. She is very, very smart, because then this way you can't come back and say, oh, you didn't protect me.
Correct. That's one of the biggest things that when agents, the biggest mistake is that when they're in a dual agent situation, there's things, more disclosures that you may need to do in terms to make sure that you're protected in that situation, right? Because again, and we can transition into these the court cases that I brought up or have been involved in, which is, again, attorneys love seeking out clients who believe they have been wronged in a real estate transaction, especially going after the agents, because agents, again, they're covered by E&O insurance under the brokerage. And in these type of situations, your E&O insurance as a broker does cover what we call negligence. And arguably, if you have breached someone's fiduciary duty, you are negligent and could be liable for damages, right? And so
do you think it was smart for Brenda, in this case, the agent that you just saw, to make the buyer sign a document that says you are fully disclosed that I am only representing the interest of the seller? Do you
smart
think that will hold up in court?
Yeah, it could hold up in court. It's smart to at least have something documented that you've done that. Now, it's still a question about if some attorney does represent someone in that situation, are they able to make some sort of argument that says that this document shouldn't be considered or isn't enforceable? I don't know, right? Yeah. It really depends on the jurisdiction that you're in. But at least with having something signed, signed by a buyer, acknowledging that that the agent is only representing the interests of the sellers, at least at least they can't claim that they didn't know about it. However, I'll put a caveat to that. The number of times that the people have said, I signed this, but I've never read over it. Okay. It perplexes me in every single real estate transaction dispute. Okay. I've been in enough depositions where, you signed it. It says you actually signed it. Are you claiming now that you actually didn't read it?
But that doesn't hold up in court. I mean, come on, you have to admit that won't hold up in court. Oh, I signed it, but I didn't read it.
And look, this is the risk why sometimes these cases do settle. Okay, is because you could get 12 jurors that sees it very differently. Right. Again, there's a lot of risk here that just because it's very clearly I signed, signing means I have read over it and understood.
That's why I would prefer a bench trial over a jury trial.
One of my cases was basically, I actually represent, this was actually one of my few plaintiff type cases where I did sue the agent. Claiming breach of fiduciary duty because it was a dual agent situation. And in deposition, my client, who was the buyer in the transaction, signed all these, right? Because these days everything goes through DocuSign. You just click it, and clicking means you, right? Presumably you read it.
Yeah.
right? But if you've sent it out, your DocuSign, and then 3 minutes later comes back fully signed, have you actually read it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that's what they said. I signed the other side's attorney that represented the real estate agent basically asked, "You signed it, right? Are you saying that you signed things without reading it?" And yes. And how can you acknowledge you sign things without reading things all the time? The cell phone sign up for cell phone things. Have you actually read through every single word of that contract?
Every single word of all 7,000 pages.
It happens every day. We sign things all the time without reading things. You sign when you pay things and you sign paying for a credit card, you are essentially signing something that you haven't read, right? The credit card agreement that you received when you sign up for that credit, has anyone ever read that? No. Okay.
So here's the thing. It's funny because when people sign simple as buying an airline ticket, the fact of buying an airline ticket, basically you have agreed to that contract that the airline has said that, limits their liability and all of this other stuff. Most people aren't even aware of that, just the act of buying that ticket. The reality of it is if you read through what you signed, you'd be very weary to sign anything.
Yeah, yeah, and that's just the reality is about how a lot of people operate these days. So just because a contract says by signing this, I have knowledge, I have read and fully understand it, there's still risk whenever things like this, these type of situations do end up, in litigation. That's why they often settle.
Eric,
Like the case that
how did that settle? How did
yeah,
that
so I can't fully disclose whatever the terms of the settlement, but it eventually did settle for a figure, right? The agent had to, cough up a portion of the commission that was received, right, to compensate my client, right? I took it on contingency, so I took, a percentage of that, right? And, it was a smaller case, but, that's how these things operate. And dual agencies, you as an agent, you put yourself in that situation where if one of either the buyer or the seller is just not happy, they seek out an attorney who's hungry enough. That's how lawsuits get started.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, share with me because I remember the one time you shared with me a story about this individual bought a property 4 years later, came to you and said, "Hey, I think I overpaid for my property." You had to do like a reverse appraisal, looking for what the property was theoretically worth back in, about 4 or 5 years ago. And this was a little while ago. And then what ended up happening was you had to prove that because this was a dual agent situation, that the listing agent convinced the buyer to overpay. Do you remember that lawsuit? By any chance? Probably not. It's been so long. You deal with so many.
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
because I
overpaying type
remember
of
you telling
thing.
me that.
Yeah, it happens quite often, especially, during the pandemic when there was so much competitive competition for when you have 30 plus offers for a single listing, those are the types of environments where people become desperate and are willing to take on more risks to get your offer accepted. And oftentimes I see dual agents situations, and then the offers that the buyer submits that gets accepted have all contingencies waived. Okay,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
those I have seen so many, especially again, I don't always pick on the Bay Area because we're in San Diego, but I get clients from the Bay Area calling me and saying my agent told me this was the only way that I can get my offer accepted, which is all contingency waived. The agent double-ended the deal, but represented both the sellers and the buyers. Right. So how can you in that situation confidently say that I represented both sides' interests, right? Any agent that tells you that you should put an all contingencies removed offer into a real estate transaction needs to be fired immediately. Okay.
So let me, for those audience who aren't familiar with what that means, what does an all contingency removed offer mean?
Means you have no period of time that either you're going to be doing your inspections or investigations of the property or doing an appraisal to confirm the price of the property, right? or for your loan contingencies to make sure you can get this loan, right? There's a period of time that's called contingencies to secure those three items. And if you can't, or if something in the inspection doesn't look right and you're unhappy with, or if you don't get the loan qualification you need, or if the purchase price and the appraisal, there's, a discrepancy in this, with the contingencies in place, you can then cancel and say, I don't want to proceed, and get your deposit back. Right? It's very important because you never know when you go into a real estate transaction what issues might arise, and you don't want to lose on that deposit. And all contingency removes means I have no backup plan. All right, I'm taking this property as is. Doesn't matter what is disclosed to me or I find out. I'm proceeding, because if I don't, I lose my deposit. Right?
It could actually be more. The way the contract is written, actually, you can lose up to 3% of the purchase price if the seller can show that they've been damaged as a result of your offer.
Yeah, so whatever the deposit is, usually I see 3%, but yeah, sometimes deposits are less. In which case you can be responsible up to 3% is in damages. And in the car form specifically it says your broker does not recommend this, right? And so I don't understand how people were that desperate enough to buy real estate, and then they close on the deal, and then they say, oh my god, I bought, there's all these issues, they come find me, and I'm like, well, you can sue your agent because they got an insurance policy that might pay out, right?
Typical lawyer. Hey, you can sue your agent, I can make some money.
Right.
Love it. Well, that's what that other lady was saying. It isn't a problem until it's a problem. And then when it's a problem, then we all run off to court and have to settle it. And this is how lawyers make up their living.
That's what attorneys do. This is how they make a living, which is why we're such a litigious society, right? But as an agent, you need to know, do you really want to risk it and put yourself in that position? Yeah, you might get a very hefty commission check, but any attorney can also sue you and you have no commission.
Yeah. Or worse, it can end up even being more negative as a result.
Correct.
And so, yeah. So let's talk about a couple of cases that you shared with me. So go ahead, tell me like the most common lawsuits that you have seen with regards to where a buyer uses the listing agent, and then what happened. Like, just so our audience is aware that this is a real thing.
Well, what happened? Well, let's see. I just recently, last week, got a call. Okay, this property was in San Mateo. They purchased it, again, a dual agent situation. Basically, I believe they said they went to the open house. The listing agent was showing it. The listing agent also told them that the only way you can get this property is all contingency removed, right? And you need to, and actually, they actually had an inspection report already prepared by the sellers, right? To say, look, it's okay for you to do a all contingencies removed because look at all the disclosures that we have already organized for you, right? There was already an inspection report. They did fill out all the TDS and SPQs, right? So
hang on, TDS is transfer disclosures, SPQ is seller questionnaire for those of you.
Yes, and that's actually, was the I think the 10th time. We constantly get this where in the Bay Area, the sellers already pre-prepared the disclosures before the property is actually entered into escrow, right? And I think that people do it, at least on the seller side, do it because they want people to do these all contingency removed offers, right? There's like, well, it's okay. Here's all the thing. That's a red flag, viewers. Okay. Anytime
we don't do it here in San Diego. We do not do it here in San Diego.
Okay. Anytime, and I told the client, I was like, why? anytime a seller pre-discloses this to try to get you to, to be not worried about buying this property, it's very fishy. I would have second thoughts on that, but okay, they were like, I really want this
Property is
house.
fine. Trust me.
They really want this house. They said the inspection report looked fine, and so they submitted the all conditions. They actually, and again, to your viewers, even if you do an all contingency removed, it doesn't prohibit you to still do an inspection if you want to do an inspection. Okay, all right. You just can't back out of the deal if in the inspections you find problems with the property, but you can still hire people to come in the house and check to verify that there's, because sometimes the problem could be so severe that it's probably better for you to just give up your deposit. You don't know, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened is they didn't even do an inspection, they didn't do pests, they didn't do all the standard things that all the agents are supposed to do. And then they buy the house and then realize there's a rodent infestation with the property. I'm
Yikes.
like, oh, okay, well,
So was in this situation, did the buyers, were they represented by the listing agent as well?
yes,
Okay.
it's a dual agent situation, right? Um, and I don't understand. Again, this is the thing that clearly there is definitely a breach of fiduciary duty here. All right,
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think that in that type of situation that the listing agent acted in the buyer's interest whatsoever. All right, not even saying, hey, you might want to do a pest inspection, all right, or do your own independent home inspection. All right, don't just say the sellers has the when they sellers do an inspection, hire an inspector. All right, every time I look at it, it's like furniture's already still everywhere. The inspector is probably not going to a certain room, or okay, you don't you I it's I just don't understand why again people do this. It's just very bizarre. Get your home inspector, all right, that represents you, all right,
You paid for, not the
that
seller.
you pay for, that not the sellers pay for.
Yeah.
So I get that. That was last week, and I just basically said, look, this is your options here. You can sue the agent if you want. You can technically sue the sellers for non-disclosure. A rodent infestation
Yeah.
is something that should have been disclosed and should have been known.
Yeah.
But again, if you look at the car forms, without any type of dispute you have with the sellers, you got to go through mediation and arbitration, right? And this is something that I always consult on because we get all the calls where someone buys a property unhappy with, calls me and says, what do I do? Right? And I say, well, you can sue the sellers. There's a mediation and arbitration clause. Read it, understand it, know that's what you now have agreed to in terms of dispute resolution process. All right. Or you can go to the agent. The agent, again, nowadays, because the buyer or there's some sort of listing agreement, all right, so you go defer to that to look at, is there any dispute resolution provisions in there, whether you have to first mediate it. If not, then you can sue the agent directly in court, right? Usually agents do have some sort of insurance policy that will kick in to cover if they were found liable in that situation.
Yeah.
So it's just not something that a buyer should be and want to be in after they have spent so much money buying a house, is ending up in having to sue people or being in a lawsuit. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I actually had another one. I referred this person to you because they called me initially. So this was a dual situation. Buyer's agent represented both the buyer and the seller. But the funny thing was, it was the seller that was calling us and saying that the buyer's their agent was pressuring them to close escrow because they had removed the buyers. We had done all the disclosures, everything. The contract said that the sellers are now required to move forward, and the buyer was going to issue them a notice to perform. I highly doubt the buyer even knew what notice to perform was. That is definitely something the agent told the buyer. Sign this notice to perform here, Mr. Seller. You have a notice to perform to their own seller. So,
It actually happens on the seller side too. Okay. And because agents technically, the commission comes from the sellers, right? Or at least on the listing agent side, if you're listing, it comes from the sellers. So you have a financial incentive for this to close so you can get your commission. You don't get paid if you don't close on this deal, right? So if you've spent a lot of time listing this property. You may have a difficult client. The seller is being very picky. He's all rejected all these offers. You now looking like, I spent over 6 months with this client. We're not seeing any movement on this. I'm wasting my time. You might start doing some things that may not be in the interest of your client and start pressuring them to get this deal closed, right?
Yeah. Or maybe the contract, your listing agreement is running out of time, and you're going to lose this
Or
listing.
yeah, your listing agreement has an expiration date. You're going to lose it, right?
Yeah, and then they're going to have
And
somebody else.
I also see a lot of these upticks in these type of behavior on agents, especially in a downturn real estate economy, right? Agents, during the pandemic, any agent can sell, right? People were buying and selling left and right. Well, not so much selling, but buying left and right. Right. And then now when you have volume decrease in the number of transactions, real estate agents do become desperate in terms of making a living, and they sometimes do resort in shady tactics, right? They may not fully inform their client of something that they know, if I tell my client this, I'm going to lose this deal, right? That's money does motivate and change behavior.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anybody with half a brain would already agree with that. Money will change people's behavior. Um, the thing is this is why I don't double represent my buyers and sellers, and this is the same reason why when we represent our buyers, we hire you, Eric, as the attorney to review it for our clients. I mean, we pay you, you're our attorney, but you're doing it for the benefit of the buyer, because we are also trying to protect the buyer. We're trying to protect the buyer in that we don't want them to not know what they're signing, because like you said, nobody reads it because
No
they're
one reads it. No, no one reads it. All right. And if
Eric,
you
will read
actually
it.
read it, you probably don't comprehend it. All right. It's all this verbiage, and all that. Right. So my job is really to point out the key issues in these contracts that people are aware of based on, my experience in resolving these type of real estate disputes. So I know exactly what commonly occurs or common problems that I see. Right. Right. I can't be 100%, guarantee things, right? But I can minimize that risk in an already very expensive purchase,
Yeah.
right?
So if you're
Um,
thinking about buying a house, reach out to me here in San Diego. If you're thinking about buying anywhere across the country, I have a very large network of agents that I know and trust. And if you're here in San Diego, know that we will have your interest protected. We will bring an attorney like Eric. And then I'm sorry to say, if you're in a situation where you're not happy with what you bought and you need some legal advice, reach out to us. We'll put you in touch with Eric. Eric will then have a conversation with you and then tell you that you shouldn't have hired the listing agent to represent you. Oh boy.
I
We laugh at it, but it is a very serious, serious topic.
it's a problem, and it is what it is. You know, People get them into these situations because they don't know. Okay, that's the worst thing. I think as a buyer, if you're looking to buy your first house, you really need to, take some time to ask, right? Either if it's calling a real estate agent and it's to see, look, what are the things that I need to know about, or calling a real estate attorney like myself, because we get calls at first time home buyers. We're listed on a lot of these employer, legal plan benefits things. So we do get a lot of calls where they basically set up a consultation with me, and I explain this is the home buying process, what you need to be aware of, right? Definitely have an agent. There's nothing wrong with an agent. And sometimes I do say, well, if you want to do a dual agent situation, here are the things that you need to be aware of. At least that way they know what they're getting themselves into. And then if something bad happens, then I just hold up my "I told you" sign, right? Right? Right?
People hate that, right? When you hold that "I told you" sign up.
Right? Right? It's the worst case that says "I didn't know," right? It's no, it's well, I knew this could happen because Mr. Ching explained that, so I only have myself to blame, right?
Yeah. No. Then people will never say that, even if you got it in writing. Them admitting that, they'll be like, "Well, I didn't read it when I signed it."
Well, I didn't know I could do this, right? And I want to, like, there's one form that I always point out to people, the buyers, is that at the end of the purchase agreement. I don't know why cars always puts that at the end. The buyer investigation advisory.
It should
All
be
right?
the first thing.
Should be the first thing, and it
Yes.
should be in big bold letters, all right, that tells the buyer what is your legal obligations in this transaction, what investigations you should be doing, and what your agent broker, it says broker recommends, all right? Because the number of times it says, well, my broker didn't tell me this. They're not telling you this because it's already in all the things that you've signed. I don't understand why the people don't understand. All the verbiage that is in this is basically the things that your agent should have told you that they're not telling you. Okay, so you can't claim that your agent didn't tell you because you signed something that says, "I read through all of this. I fully understood." Okay.
And the thing is okay. So we're gonna close this live show, but one thing I want to bring is, even after all of this that we've discussed and we've shared with you guys, I know there are buyers out there that are still going to think, well, you know what? That's not me. I know better. I know how to negotiate. I know how to protect myself. I know this. And, from a professional recommendation is, because you don't do this on a daily basis, it's behooves you to talk to somebody who actually does and is a real estate professional. You do not want to self surgery, right? You don't want to do an open heart surgery on yourself. And you're like, well, this is nowhere near as complicated as an open heart surgery. Yeah, maybe. But it is the most expensive asset that you'll probably own. And when it goes wrong, it goes wrong. And yeah, maybe you might have legal grounds to sue, but do you really want to be stuck in court fighting it out? Oh, I see Eric's head shaking. He's a lawyer. He doesn't even want to be in court.
No.
Yeah. So, all right. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Reach out to us. We're going to put our Calendly link. You can go to our website, findyourhomesandiego.com/contact, and then you'll be able to reach out to me. I'll put you in touch with Eric. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I hope you guys found this helpful, because that's really the purpose of this show, is to just give you information that you're not going to get from agents, because they're not going to have necessarily the motivation to tell you what we're going to tell you, because Eric doesn't give a crap about how the transaction goes. He just represents people, right? And so
I don't get a commission. I don't get. Sometimes I tell I just like, oh, how about you pay me the commission, since I'm the one that's actually explaining all these documents to your client.
Yeah.
I literally have agents give me a call, all right, saying, hey, are you willing to explain something,
to my client,
review these documents or whatnot. I'm like, I'm doing what are you, what did you really do, agent? Okay.
Yeah.
Besides fill out forms, all right, and then open doors for this person. Like sometimes the
Well,
amount of work
I'm
that
gonna
these
have to
agents
argue with you on that one. I think we do a lot.
I'm just perplexed on how you guys are making that much in commissions, and I feel like I'm doing
We
more work.
earned that commission, buddy. I can argue with you that lawyers shouldn't be able to charge $800 an hour or $500 an hour either.
We can definitely have that debate.
We will. And I think we'll both lose because people will both say that we're both overpaid.
Yeah, probably.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you guys watching the show. Reach out to us. We're here to help you. Sincerely, we're here to help you. If you have any questions, we goof around on the show because Eric and I are good friends, but don't do this on your own. Find help. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. And we're out. Thanks,
out.
Eric.
Bye.